And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Well, here we are on April 5, 2024. You have returned to another riveting episode of the More Liberty Podcast. Some of us just like to call it the Liberty Podcast. Either one is fine. As I said, it's a April day here in the undisclosed studios. The sun is shining amid the beautiful pines of Moore County. And it is a beautiful day to be a North Carolinian, especially if you're an alumni of North Carolina State, salivating over the big basketball games this weekend. The women and the men are both in the Final Four against the expectations of, I guess, most of these so-called experts. But what do they know? Anyway, I was smiling as we started rolling today because news has just come over the transom that a 4.8 earthquake has struck New York City in the last hour. And I just can't think of a better place for an earthquake to occur than in that disgusting place. And maybe it's a little wake-up call from a higher authority to the Attorney General of New York, Tish James, that her unethical lawfare against Donald J. Trump has not gone unnoticed, shall we say. So they're recovering from their big 4.8, but I would say that as usual, the Trump Tower will not have been even slightly affected by this incident today in Manhattan. I bet it's standing tall as ever. While little Letitia cowers somewhere in her office, along with the various other corrupt people in New York, including Mayor Eric Adams. But let's not get too sidetracked by the mayor and his city that is in decay, being overrun by illegal immigrants every moment of every day. We've got a lot to get to today. First of all, this was kind of funny this week. You feel like we live in a world where everybody's trying to convince you that anybody who complains about the state of affairs under the Biden regime, may not be smart enough to understand what's really going on. And we got a whiff of that from this columnist with the Wall Street Journal. His name is Greg Ip. Really, his name is Greg Ip, IP. He writes, there's nothing wrong with the economy. It's you, meaning you and I, not the data. Really? Well, he says this. In the 12 months through February of this year, inflation, according to the century-old Consumer Price Index, was 3.2% compared with 6% a year earlier, which means that inflation is lower than it was a year ago. Well, we get that. For the average person, he says, inflation went down. Yet, according to a recent Wall Street Journal poll of swing states, those are the battleground states for the election, 74% of respondents said inflation had moved in the wrong direction in the past year. And this got Mr. Ip very ippity, I guess you might say. The average person thinks inflation went up, he moans. When it comes to the economy, apparently, the vibes are at war with the facts, and the vibes are winning. This is obviously bad news for President Biden's reelection hopes. He can't exactly tell voters they are wrong. He would be called out of touch, and it probably wouldn't change anything. The vibes seem symptomatic of a broader pessimism disconnected from the data. Well, now on that, I think we can find common ground. Why is there pessimism sweeping the land? Why is there a general state of malaise among the American people? Because they live under a regime that is allowing the southern border to be overrun. And then, the media are now saying, well, there are fewer coming across. Okay, but does that account for the 10 million already here? Does that change that? Of course it doesn't. Mr. Ip goes on to say, pointing to this journal poll, by more than 2-1, respondents said the economy had gotten worse rather than gotten better over the past 2 years. To be sure, inflation and shortages were severe from 2021 through early 2023, Wuhan virus, and the improvement in the data since then might not have been enough to erase those bad memories. So he's upset that we're not reading the data closely enough and changing our tune about how we feel. Views on inflation are a function of broader pessimism. Where does this pessimism come from? One popular culprit is the media. You better believe it is. 24/7, telling us how all of us who want to make America great again are domestic terrorists. And therefore, and we're too dumb to understand how great we have it under the Biden regime with persistently high prices and whatnot. So Mr. Ip can say anything he wants. In the same day on the Wall Street Journal's website, and I assume it's print edition, they run this headline with no apologies to Mr. Ip. How far $100 goes at the grocery store after 5 years of food inflation. Subhead, from beef to mayo, consumers continue to spend more to buy less. Writes Stephanie Stamm and Jesse Newman, April 4, that was yesterday. Grocery prices were up 1% in February from a year earlier, according to Labor Department data. They were up 10.2% in February 2023 versus a year earlier, and were up 1.2% in February 2019 from a year earlier. So the word up has been in play even before the Wuhan virus. Prices for hundreds of grocery items have increased more than 50% since 2019 as food companies raise their prices. Executives said the higher prices were needed to offset their own rising costs for ingredients, transportation, and labor. So here are the price increases on a number of categories that you will encounter in your grocery store today if you go there or this weekend. Cooking oil is now up 54%, beef up 51%, fruit snacks 77%, mayo up 50%, applesauce up 51%, bacon is down a little bit. How about that? Well, that's interesting. Tilapia, that's fish for you following at home, is down 11%. So if you're a pescatarian, you're saving money right and left. Right and left. Furthermore, an organization called the Committee to Unleash Prosperity points out that we hate to keep sounding like the skunk at the Fed and the Wall Street's garden party celebrating the coming interest rate cuts, but we will shout it as loud as we have to. Inflation is not coming down. Here they show us the latest prices of more than 20 major commodities. In just 4 months, these prices have skyrocketed by 12%. 12%, according to the CRB Commodity Index, which they cite. So, you're not dreaming when you continue to feel that there is a pinch every time you turn around to buy something. And to say nothing of the cost of buying a home, which has become increasingly unaffordable, to buy a new car, for many, unthinkable. Okay, let's move on down to some more data. And this happens to involve our beloved brethren at the Centers for Disease Control. They are good at whipping us into hysteria and not very good about telling the truth, as it turns out. Here we go. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has released previously hidden reports of facial paralysis. Think Joe Biden when he's given a speech. And other adverse events following what? COVID-19 vaccinations, which were not vaccinations, which were experimental usage serums, untrialed, untested, rushed into the market. Guess how many reports were received by the CDC that they hid? 780,000 were received shortly after vaccines were rolled out, and they show that people experienced a wide range of post-vax problems, including heart inflammation, miscarriages, and seizures. Whoa. But the CDC didn't really think they needed to, alert anybody to these important numbers because the pharmaceutical industry, in whom they trust and in whom they profit from greatly, was not about to allow them to release important data. This is quite unbelievable. The first two tranches of data, so there's more to come, comprise 780,000 reports from some 523,000 people, including dozens of reports of heart inflammation, hundreds of reports of facial paralysis, and thousands of reports of tinnitus. That's ringing in the ear, which is, not a fatal thing, but can drive you nuts. People literally seek mental treatment for tinnitus, let alone medical. Multiple people said things were so bad they were struggling with suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts? Now, we reported in the More Liberty Digest earlier this week, ladies and gentlemen, that there is now a warning coming from a Belgian virologist that the vaccines in living still in your bodies, if you receive them, and all the boosters too, that those are mutating and will actually be triggering another round, another strain of the COVID-19 virus, and that it's going to be very severe in, guess who? The vaccinated. Can you make this stuff up? Oh, no, you can't. Now, here's a related story. I think you and I are becoming almost numb, and it's a sad thing to have to say, to the daily, almost daily reports of young, healthy people all around the world, including in the United States, dying suddenly of various cardiac problems, of cancer diagnoses that are very aggressive forms of cancer, which mean that they're essentially healthy one day and 2 weeks later they're gone. Here's the latest from Lexington, Kentucky. A University of Kentucky dance team member died of cancer last weekend. School officials said. Kate Coughlin had a type of bone cancer. She was 20 years old. She just joined the college dance team last fall with her twin sister. Just like that, this beautiful girl gone. Now you're saying, well, these things happen even to young people. Bone cancer is actually quite common in younger adults among cancers. But let's cut to the chase here. Here's a piece by Dr. Pierre Corey, one of the leading opponents of the vax during the pandemic, widely castigated for his warnings by the pharmaceutical industry, of course, who wanted to muzzle people like him, if not send him away, if you know what I'm saying. Here's what he wrote in the Washington Times, March 26, last week. It is called early onset cancer. And the Princess of Wales, Kate, diagnosed at 42, which I'm sure you're aware of, is part of an unfortunate new trend of more and more young cancer cases. Yale, Harvard, and the American Cancer Society each weighed in recently the unthinkable twist in the toll of cancer. A record 2 million people in the United States will suffer malignancies this year, the society said, and a larger share of the 600,000 will die. And they will be younger than ever before. This has marked a sea change in the American Cancer Society's message on cancer, which for the previous 29 years has been largely tied to racial disparities in survival rates for cancer. But the 2024 report is different. Colorectal cancer moved as of 2021 to the leading cause from fourth of cancer deaths in people under 50. Young adult oral and liver cancer deaths were increasing, along with deaths from cervical tumors in women ages 30 through 44, reversing decades of decline. Decades of decline. Well, is it coincidental? We think not, and neither do these physicians who warned us from the outset. Be careful with these vaccines, ladies and gentlemen, especially forcing young, healthy people in the military, in professional sports leagues, forcing them to be vaccinated, or else they lose their jobs and a lot of money and benefits in the case of the military. All right, let's keep going, folks. There's been a lot of discussion lately, I think you're seeing it as well as I am, about teacher shortages in public schools, in our public schools. The Raleigh News and Observer reported earlier this week on these shortages. And here's what they had to say. North Carolina's teacher turnover rate has soared by 47%, with 1 in 9 educators having left the profession. The report presented Wednesday to the State Board of Education shows a teacher attrition rate of 11.5% between March 22 and March 23. That means that 10,373 teachers left the profession in that time period. Okay, and the rates are higher in other states. Now, why is that? Well, of course, you know, the left likes to tell us that if we would just pay the teachers more, they wouldn't be leaving, that they're dramatically underpaid. And yet we know in North Carolina that pay raises for teachers have been in every budget coming out of the state legislature. Why do I use these words? From the State House for years now. For years, the raises have been incremental and continuous. One of the other problems with teacher shortages is that you're finding that fewer are coming out of the universities with these licensed teacher credentials. In the state of North Carolina, they are required by law to strictly hire teachers who are licensed under, you know, various formula, which takes into account their college degree and then other qualifications that they have and certifications and whatnot, and then they can become a teacher. An article in the Carolina Journal suggests that it might be a good idea if North Carolina did away with the teacher licensure requirements and let school districts decide who to hire for themselves. There's an interesting idea. As far as I can tell, the main effect would be that school systems would have much less red tape when hiring and would therefore have more potential candidates. There's a thought. And here's where he really hits the core issue, which I don't think enough attention is given to. An added benefit to this approach is it could reduce the radicalism and activism by public school teachers that is driving so many parents to look elsewhere for how to educate their children. That is a fact. They come out of these universities pre-wired to become gender groomers and to become fierce critics of American history and our so-called racist, systemic racist past, which allows them to easily convince students, they think, that they live in a country that is nothing to be proud of. And in fact, more and more young people are saying that they do not feel patriotic when they think about their country of origin. It's a tragic trend that really needs to stop. But here is the piece of analysis that I think hits at the problem of why there's a teacher shortage. I don't think it's just pay and benefits. I don't think it's that it's too hard. But the problem is, and nobody wants to talk about this, and I think this is the root cause of it, is the students. Unparented, undisciplined, unable to learn, not desirous of learning. And this is what the teachers are growing tired of. And sure enough, one of the authors at the Fordham Institute has just come out with an analysis based on messages and conversations with 200 teachers. And the headline of his just posted piece is, quote, "We've made teaching impossible," or "What I learned after talking to 200 teachers." One theme surfaced over and over again, writes Daniel Buck. Here they are. Here are the comments and he received from teachers who have either left the profession or are fed up and thinking about it. "Our school isn't safe. Fights are constant with little consequence." Another says, "Teachers are cussed out, threatened, disrespected with no consequences. The general public doesn't understand the crisis we are in. Teachers face an ever-mounting list of responsibilities and pressure, while students face ever fewer." Other than the lack of discipline, lenient grading was the second most common complaint. Teachers cannot assign, are ordered not to assign, failing grades or to administer penalties for late work, or they're not even allowed to grade students' homework. Okay, this is unbelievable. This dynamic is all the more pronounced regarding behavior. If a teacher hopes administration will assign a detention after a student cusses them out, they face a barrage of questions. Have they documented sufficient low-level disruptions to warrant a consequence? How many times have they communicated with parents, who are often AWOL? Had they built relationships with the students? Is their class engaging enough, or is the material relevant to the student? In other words, if the kid acts up, drops an F-bomb on you, acts violently in the classroom, maybe it's not his fault. Maybe it's the teacher's fault. It's getting to the point, concludes the author, that students consider themselves to be the authority. And this teacher says, "I have been called more names and gotten more threats this year than the previous 26 during which I was a teacher." How would you like to put up with that every day as a teacher? You know, they don't bring you an apple anymore. They throw it at you. And you're lucky if it's an apple. It's probably some other projectile. Conversely, in one violent school, writes this teacher, "I had a stand-in principal who pressed for clear hallways and timely class attendance. When fights in the lunchroom, tanking reading scores, and chaotic classrooms called for attention, he focused entirely on attendance. It may have seemed like there were bigger fish to fry, but when we concentrated on attendance, the very culture of the school began to change." By the way, there is a report in the New York Times that post-pandemic, the average absenteeism in public schools nationwide remains higher than before the pandemic at 26%. Through 2023 in Moore County, North Carolina, it was 19%, 5% higher than pre-pandemic. So this is a very timely point here. When the bell for class rang, administrators patrolled every hall and sent every tardy student to our building's theater to check in. 3 tardies earned a suspension. And rowdiness in the suspension room got them kicked out for the day. So in other words, zero tolerance. Zero tolerance. Quickly, other areas of the school began to change. When teachers could begin in a timely fashion, classrooms developed smoother routines. When the hallways were clear, it changed the atmosphere inside and outside the classrooms. This was no longer a place for play, but one for learning. Students who usually spent hours ambling the hallways attended class. What? Developed new goals, rubbed shoulders with their more academically minded peers, and developed relationships with their teachers. Then what happened? Unfortunately, this administrator was only with us for a short time. His replacement lectured us about the ambiguity of insubordination among students, and the school returned to chaos. So, next time you hear about teacher shortages, tell your school board members or your school administrators, your superintendents, to focus on the root cause, which is declining discipline among students, which is directly connected to poor parenting in our homes. These kids are not coming to school equipped to learn. They have never been taught to respect adults, certainly not teachers. And it's not going to change until our culture addresses the erosion in the nuclear family. That's the big bottom line, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's wrap this up, this wonderful podcast. It's been fun for me. I hope it has been for you. And they're still quaking after the quake in New York City, by the way. So what a great way to kick off a weekend, huh? Really exciting. The goons in Washington, the Biden regime goons at the FBI, are still hunting people down who happen to walk into the Capitol on 6 January 2021, maybe take a few photos, roll some video on their phone. They're still hunting these people down. Here's some of the latest. The FBI arrested a Loudoun County, Virginia couple early Thursday, that would have been last week, for entering the Capitol building 3 years ago, according to a recent interview of the couple. Thomas Kasparek and his wife, Dr. Daphne Kasparek, in a podcast interview, said that the FBI came to their home around 6 a.m. in cars with flashing lights, pounded on the door, and yelled for them to come out with their hands up. They opened the door and stuck an M4, which is a rifle, in my face, he said. They were in full gear. About 6 guys at the door with their guns drawn. He said that Mr. Kasparek asked for a warrant, but they told him they would show it to him when they got him downtown. They put him in hand and ankle cuffs. They did the same to his wife, Daphne. They were taken downtown to an FBI field office, fingerprinted, swabbed for DNA, photographed, and then interrogated. Thomas said it was apparent, Mr. Kasparek said it was apparent that the FBI had been building a case against them for entering the Capitol 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Now, what did they do inside the Capitol? Well, they were there for 12 minutes, okay? They were charged with 4 misdemeanors, including disorderly or disruptive conduct in a restricted building or grounds, and yet they were there for 12 minutes and did nothing. This is Gestapo treatment, says Sebastian Gorka, who interviewed them, and he's right. Here's another one. 10 minutes spent on the afternoon of January 6, 2021, on what she considered a God-directed mission will cost a Denver area 71-year-old resident, Rebecca Lavrins, up to a year in prison, could cost a year in prison and fines of more than $200,000. But the great-grandmother and bed and breakfast owner in Colorado says she doesn't regret walking into the Capitol during the Stop the Steal rally protesting the 2021 presidential results. She said, "I felt I was there on assignment from God." A jury trial starts soon in U.S. District Court after she faces 4 federal misdemeanor charges, same as that couple. They're hitting all these thousands of people with these same charges, many of them baseless. She faces these 4 charges after spending 10 minutes inside. 10 minutes inside. She says, just standing up for my country makes me a criminal? It's not right. It's just not right, she says. I've always been a lifelong lover of truth, and I felt something went really wrong with that 2020 election, and I hate injustice. Well, so do we here at the Liberty Podcast, and I hope that's true of all of us. Now, let's get to the bigger numbers here. Lavrens, this is the lady from Colorado, Mrs. Lavrens, is among 1,358 people charged with criminal actions related to the Jan 6 rally that turned violent. Well, it turned violent for a handful of people. For the rest of them, they were just kind of there. She is one of 1,276 defendants who allegedly entered or remained in a restricted federal building or grounds. And that's not enough for the FBI. About 500 new cases are expected to come before the U.S. District Court this year. This year. Last week, a jury convicted a man from Virginia who went inside the Capitol for 3 minutes and walked around and took photos. And last week, a man was sentenced to 63 months in prison, also from Colorado, for his involvement in the event. He was convicted of 3 felonies and ordered to pay restitution. They are hunting American citizens like animals and then charging them unjustly with crimes that they didn't commit just to make an example of you and I, because we challenged the outcome of an election that had clearly been compromised by all kinds of laws that were changed and election protocols that were broken in the name of safety amid the virus. Let's not forget, they exploited this virus from the get-go, and man, when we got to Election Day 2020, they were in full corruption mode, and it paid off, getting 81 million votes for this guy who can barely put one foot in front of the other, can't complete a sentence, doesn't know what day it is allowing the border to remain open to the peril of our citizens. We're seeing weekly murders by undocumented illegals. Again and again and again. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. And let's continue to pray for our country. That's the best we can do. Pray for our country and get out there and stand behind Donald Trump as he seeks to return to the White House on January 20, 2025 to get this country back on track, restore our economy, get us out of Ukraine, and once and for all, give the full backing of the United States to Israel so that it can crush the Hamas terrorists permanently. Pray for all of that, ladies and gentlemen. And now I'd like to thank you for joining us for yet another Liberty Podcast. We'll see you again next time.